What does it look like when two leaders, each defined by experience, innovation, and performance, unite to elevate Canadian real estate lending? With nearly a decade of serving the needs of investors, borrowers, and mortgage brokers in the alternative market, Neighbourhood Holdings has now taken a major step forward by acquiring fiscal Asset Management, forming one of the largest alternative mortgage lenders in Canada. Together, they manage nearly $800 million in mortgages across more than 2,000 borrowers and over 3,000 investors nationwide. Through the Neighbourhood banner, the team works directly with mortgage brokers across Canada, providing short-term mortgages for quality borrowers who may not fit traditional bank criteria. Every loan is backed by real assets, ensuring a measured, conservative approach, seeking to provide investors with stable income while preserving invested capital. Whether you're a mortgage broker seeking flexible financing options or an advisor looking for regular income solutions, Neighbourhood's expanded reach brings track record, transparency, and opportunity, now even stronger with Fisgar's 30-year legacy. To learn more about the Neighbourhood, visit neighborhood.com to view the offering memorandum or speak to your financial advisor today. This is not advice, and consult a professional advisor before investing a loonie in any of these investments. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this information discussed today is not intended to be or construed as investment advice. Please consult a professional advisor before putting a loonie in any of these financial markets.
The dirty secret is that no one's ever going to get paid back.
People have the shortest memories when it comes to investment.
We just got to get Keith into Bitcoin.
Hey, there's a bubble.
Welcome back to the Loonie Hour, episode 228. As always, joined with the three amigos, Keith Dicker over in Halifax, Rich Diaz in Montreal. Welcome back to the show, Richard.
Gentlemen, do I have a story for you? I was in Vancouver visiting a friend and meeting some clients and meeting you, Steve, which was really fun. I saw your office, very nice. And in the airport in Vancouver, I met my Loonie Hour crush, Carolyn Rogers, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. And she was obviously at the end of a business trip and was just like minding her own business, walking through the airport. Nobody noticed her, of course, because, I mean, only nerds like me know what central bankers look like. And I walked right up to her. I was like, hey, you're Carolyn Rogers. And she's like, oh, who the hell is this? Why are they talking to me? And I told her I was a big fan of hers. I told her my name and I told her, oh, I'm part of the Loonie Hour podcast. And then she kind of feigned not knowing who it was. And then she kind of pretended not to know who it was. But anyway, and then I ended up taking a selfie with her and she was just a bit put off. And I was like, no, I'm a huge fan. I've read your paper from March 2024 about productivity and the update from Nathan Vincent. And then once I dropped the name of her speech and obviously one of her colleagues, she changed her attitude. We shook hands, took a selfie, and then I bounced. I did not invite her to the podcast, but it was very funny. She was very, very sweet, really nice. And there you go. They say never meet your heroes, but she was awesome. There you go. That's my story for the week.
It was pretty funny in the group chat. I get a picture coming across at 11 p.m. It's Rich and Carolyn Rogers.
She's shorter than I expected.
So Loonie Hour Inc. this week, by the way, received a cease and desist order for Rich Diaz from the Bank of Canada.
So
no, she was
Rich,
lovely.
didn't you ask her, you chirped her about Tiff Macklin or
something? Oh,
something?
right. Yeah. So I told her I was a big fan of hers, and I told her I wasn't such a big fan of her boy. I literally said of her boy Tiff. I said, and I quote, and I know this because I wrote it in the chat, he shouldn't have lied about inflation being transitory. And then she's like, oh, he didn't lie. I was like, okay, sure, whatever. And then she kind of laughed, obviously didn't really like that. But I mean, she knew, listen, when do central bankers get recognized, really? So, I was as polite as possible, and she took it in stride. But yeah, I told her that they shouldn't have lied about inflation being transitory.
So she went home that weekend, and she's telling her family, yeah, I was going to the airport, and I got recognized by Rich Diaz from the Loonie Hour. He's such a nice guy, and he's really cool, and all that stuff.
I don't know. But they definitely heard of us.
He was also carrying a very heavy bag, it looked like.
Looked like a 50-pound laptop in there.
Yeah, that's right. But she was lovely. And so, hi, Carolyn Rogers. I know you sort of don't know who we are, but kind of do. There you go.
What else is going on?
That's it.
That was one of the better stories for sure. Nick Suzuki,
was a
your
good one.
boy. It's been a good week for you.
It was very stressful watching the hockey. Keith, do you have any commentary, or are we allowed to talk about the Olympics?
Well, hold on.
Yes,
now
we are.
We're recording
Yes.
this on Thursday, of course. So
Yeah.
by the time this episode comes out, we'll already probably know the outcome of the semifinals. So
Right.
Godspeed.
Yeah, it was very nerve-wracking. I did not enjoy it. I was actually in the cab on the way to the airport watching it, and the cabbie's just like not paying attention, not caring at all. And they what was it? Czech Republic scored. I was like, fuck. And then sorry, I shouldn't swear. Sorry, but that's what happened. You can beep that out, Jeff. But anyways, and then the cabbie's like reacted, and then they scored to tie it, and I like smacked the cabbie on the shoulder, and he's just like, oh, I'm like, oh, sorry. And anyway, so we had to laugh about that. There you go.
There was 8 players on the ice.
Yeah, that was crazy.
There was literally 8. They actually
Keith, did you see that?
CBC slow
Yeah, I
mode
did
it.
see that.
Anyways, enough about the hockey. Let's hope that we have a gold medal game Sunday at 5 a.m. Pacific time. beers will be flowing. What else is going on?
What else we got going on this week? I got nothing else from this side. Again, like, everyone here is in full blown like Olympic hockey mode. The big fight at the Olympics on the ice wasn't in hockey this year, of course. It was in curling. Did you guys see that?
Oh, the guy that pushed the rock with his finger. That was hilarious. The memes online are amazing.
It's pretty good, actually. It's a lot of fun. But
Hey,
that's how you bring attention to a bit of a sleepy sport.
I know people are desperate to know when the show starts, so we'll jump into it. Timestamp this, but we do have a special guest coming on. We'll kind of banter around, a little bit of market news here before we jump over to our guest this week, who is Trevor Tombe. I'll cue him up shortly, but we've been longtime fans of a lot of his work. I think he's one of the few guys that rivals Rich's ability to create charts. And so we'll frame him up here in a little bit, but that's the interview coming out for this week's pod. But Keith, we also had a lot of stuff going on this week. We had the BC budget fiasco. Here where I am, we have a little bit of housing info that I thought was kind of interesting. Obviously, U.S.-Iran is reaching a boiling point. There's a lot of rumors going around, and then a little bit of updates in the private credit world, which is something that we had flagged as sort of a bigger picture theme to keep an eye on. So we'll kind of touch on that as well. But the BC budget, $13 billion budget deficit. Horrible. Then I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, the same NDP government, they handed David Eby, I think it was a $600 million surplus. And then he's ran it up to a $13 billion record, $13 billion deficit in the matter of 2 or 3 years, I think now. So it's bad. I think even his voter base on the left is not happy. Because what's interesting is if you actually unpack it, everyone's paying the bill, quite literally. They raised the income tax bracket on the lowest tax bracket. So everyone will effectively pay unless you basically don't have an income. And they also, what I found most interesting, Rich, is they actually froze income tax bracket indexation from up until 2030. So from 2027 to 2030, maybe for those that don't follow sort of taxes and all that other boring stuff, is typically every year your tax brackets will rise with inflation. And so obviously if they're frozen,
it's done to offset the effect of inflation. So it's a positive thing they do for taxes.
Yeah. So I think I had run some simple math on ChatGPT where it's like, okay, again, grain of salt. But if let's just assume someone makes $100,000 income, with no growth in that salary over the next 3 to 4 years, I think with no indexation and a 2% inflation, I think it would equate to the government taking an extra, I think it was $300 a year in taxes, $300 or $400, something like that. So I mean, it adds up if you're paycheck to paycheck.
It's not the
lot of money.
Yeah. The BC government is not the only government that's doing this. We're going to see this more and more. So the UK did it in the budget from a couple of months ago. I can't remember when it was, but they also did it. And it's basically a stealth tax rise, right? It's not an explicit one, but it allows sort of the shifting, allows inflation basically rise when your income isn't necessarily rising. And it's just the inflation is a stealth tax anyways, and this sort of just doubles down on that mechanism.
And I
But
just
Steve,
feel like
what was the reason for the deficit being so high? Like, what were the main drivers? Was it everything, or just one or two areas?
I think it was actually I think it was just expenditures. I think that they did announce that they have a plan to basically chop 15,000 public sector jobs over the next several years.
At least they said they have a plan. Imagine they said, we have no plan here. We're just flying by the seat of our pants.
Yeah, but overall debt levels will continue to grow. I think even over the next couple of years, like the budget deficit is expected to go from, I think, 13 billion only down to like 11 billion. So like I mean, their own words where it's not an austerity budget, and I would tend to agree.
Remember The Big Short? Remember Steve Carell stood up and went to zero?
Well, Keith,
zero chance that's going to happen here.
And yeah, Keith, it's like you've always kind of joked about this, but it's like a lot of these projections of like, okay, we're going to take the deficit from 13 billion, we're going to get it down to 11 billion over the next couple of years. A lot of that sort of assumes, again, like no recession. It assumes typically rosy, a relatively more optimistic outcome. So should things go even a little bit more sideways, I think you could expect that deficit might not actually improve, but we'll see.
I mean, so from my perspective, it's not a great situation for British Columbia. However, it's going to be the same everywhere.
Yep,
guys. This is not a BC only challenge or problem. Everyone's encountering the same thing, whether it's at a municipal or city, or even a national level. Everyone has a challenge right now. And the way the government sees it, they see there's not enough tax revenue coming in to support their policies. And that's the wrong way to look at it. They should look in the mirror and say, okay, yeah, we've already taxed everyone to death here. Like, we shouldn't be taxed anymore. Instead, we're either spending too much money, or we are not productive with our spending, with the investment they're making. Because this doesn't work.
Can I just circle this back quickly? I think it's really interesting because this really sort of segues onto the conversation that we had last week with Tom Isaac, which was the sort of First Nations lawyer that explained what's happening in the province and all the land claims that are ongoing. And Tom's point was like, listen, if you really care about reconciliation, like, and you want to pay out all these First Nations and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's like you need to basically double or triple the size of the BC economy. And so I just look at it and say, wow, you're running this massive deficit. There's not really a concrete plan here. You're having to raise taxes, and like, who wants to deploy capital in this province today with everything that is going on? I mean, most of, I think, BC's issues today are self-inflicted. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think they're all correlated.
It's sort of, I think, again, you're right. Everything is correlated here. Nothing's happening in isolation. It sort of ties in with that funny, sort of weird, funny or unfunny New York City budget story as well. Want to jump into that one? Because the same gist of it, basically.
Well, it's just that, I mean, all the promises that Mamdani basically made, which is free taxing the rich and free food and free buses and all that stuff, it's all going away. And in effect, the new policy will be to raise property taxes. And effectively, that's mostly just middle-class people who may or may not own their homes. And I think that basically everyone who makes over $122,000 US in New York City will see their taxes rise. And by the way, that's maybe sounds like a lot of money, but actually in New York, that's actually not that much money at all, because obviously it's a very wealthy part of the United States. And so, yeah, it's just a middle tax rise. And it reflects, it's like it's a tax on the middle class and not the rich, because rich people just move or they shift their assets or whatever. And people who are middle class basically can't move or don't move. They don't have the same mobility. But it's just, I mean, what it is just that it reflects what's going on in BC. And I put some numbers in the chat and we can look at it right now just to put, like, what's the economists, TD Economics, put out basically the fiscal year plan, and you can see that the revenues are expected to rise by 0.5%, but the expenditures for British Columbia are expected to rise 4.4%. And so it's funny, they talk about.
Let's use Loonie Hour math on this, Rich. Does it work? Do the lines ever connect?
Yeah, I mean, it's just funny because it's about it's just sort of a microcosm of all the things we talk about. The government is assuming real GDP growth of 1.3% in 2026 and 1.8% in 2027. I have no real view on whether or not that's good or bad, but again, assumes no recession in a world of much lower population growth and really anemic productivity. Maybe we'll get to those numbers. But the key thing where the budget is really exploding is actually not on the revenue side, which is what I think if you had asked us 6 months, we would have said, oh, the revenues from the housing market are eating into, are falling. But actually you can see from the table I shared in the chat, and we can share with people, that the expenditures are rising 4.4% in next year, and it was actually 3.6% last year. So it's just wild.
The reason I brought up New York City with this is because, which we didn't lead into in the beginning, was that they came out with their budget for the year as well. So the BC budget completely missed. The New York budget completely missed, and they had the dip in the rainy day funds and things like that. But again, it's the same theme. There's not enough tax revenues coming in. So they're hiking taxes. And what that's doing, though, as Steve highlighted with BC, and that Tom did last week, Tom Isaac, is that it's actually deflecting foreign investment from coming in, or even domestic capital. So then they have to make it up by, nickel and diming, the little guy on the street. And people may not realize this, but in New York City, so if you're ever down there on Wall Street, like to get on the train to go under the Hudson, going to the Hudson over to Jersey, it takes 10 minutes. But if you're a trader in New York, you make a lot more money after taxes if your office is in New Jersey relative to Wall Street. So one of my friends, he's down there, he's a trader on Wall Street, and he told me, it's like they all have offices in New Jersey. So they all work as the fewest number of days permissible to avoid the New York taxes. So then they're always in New Jersey all the time. But they are driving capital out of the city with these policies. And people think, is it a quick fix? No, it isn't. Because the amount of debt that's been accumulated, not only in New York, but in BC, Ontario, and elsewhere. It's a common thing we've been talking about for quite some time. And I think what we're going to start tracking now on more of a real-time basis here each week, here in Canada, as each province comes out with their budget for the year. I don't know who's up next. I don't know if you know, Rich, you can let us know. But we'll continue to track this. And maybe we can create up one of these money boards, Steve, to see who's closest to, running a balanced budget or not. I'm going to go on the under on all whatever you guys want to guess. I don't think anyone in Canada has the revenue coming in or the fiscal discipline to control their spending.
Keith, speaking of chasing capital away, we didn't really talk about this, and maybe this is a longer discussion for another pod, but the Netherlands, which is, Rich, I think they've now passed it, right? I don't know if it's fully legislation yet. Is it an unrealized capital gains tax?
So I think it still has to go through their version of the upper house. It's not called the Senate.
No, it's passed. I think it's already done.
Is it really already done? Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay. Well,
Hey, well, I mean, I don't even know, what's the simplest way to explain this? I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems absolutely insane. I mean, a tax on your unrealized gain,
right?
Which you have not materialized. So again, I'm just always spitballing. Let's just say you own a hyper volatile asset such as Bitcoin, which can rise and fall in a single year by 30, 40, 50, 60%.
Yeah.
Wait, so Bitcoin can fall? You didn't tell me that.
Imagine you're up 100% in a year, which is not uncommon in Bitcoin. It then tanks, 50%.
And then you have to sell the Bitcoin to pay money for the tax.
It's I don't even know. What would be the point of owning any assets in that country? I mean, would you
So the main aspect with this, it comes back to the same BC discussion in New York. The government over in the Netherlands, they've decided we don't have enough tax revenue coming in. It's not our problem. No, they're looking in the mirror. It's not a spending problem. You're just not paying enough in taxes. Now
You
they're
think that
looking
is? I
around.
think it was like, was it not more ideologically driven? Which is
Yeah,
they
of
just
course.
want to, like, I don't even know. Was it actually like a revenue problem, or is it more just like, hey, the world is unfair, let's do this?
Well, it's a revenue. It's always a revenue problem, and then the way you address it is by going after the rich, so to speak. So you have that happening. A couple of things with it, though. It excludes your primary residence, so you don't have to worry about that for now. It is. By the way, this is going to come to Canada as well. You get one. Yeah, you say it's coming. It is. You're going to tax the rich. It's coming, guys. It's
Rich
coming.
people just move their assets. Sorry. Keep
in mind, just so we're clear. I mean, Keith, I'm a little skeptical, or maybe I'm just trying to be optimistic that we won't be as idiotic. But we did, up until 8 months ago, we had a proposal to increase the capital gains rate, or capital gains inclusion rate, which was immediately removed as soon as they realized Trump was elected and was going to be cutting taxes. But that was certainly the course that the Trudeau government was going down, with Chrystia Freeland as finance minister.
I think if we go 12 months from now, when the next federal budget is going down, if the Canadian economy has not been improving significantly, you're going to see more taxes coming down the pipe. They are absolutely going to come. And sort of look around, what can we tax? What will it be? Hey, the Dutch did this, and nobody left Holland. So I think we are going to get that metric come here. But back to the tax, for everyone appreciates that this first phase of it, they're not taxing your home, your primary residence. They'll just tax that a different way. So you raise the assessment value. That is coming here as well, by the way. That is going to come. And then there is a process in place. So for the scenario that you described, Steve, your investment goes up a lot. You got to pay taxes on it, and then it comes off, and you have losses. It's my understanding you can sort of go back and carry forward realized losses. I think there is, but it's such a complicated.
The accounting bill sounds like it's going to be.
It's a stupid idea. Just say it. It's a very stupid idea.
Again, the productivity gains from this are zero. It all it does, it's going to force some really wealthy people to say, screw this, I'm going to move to, wherever you would move if you want to leave Denmark.
Anywhere, Bermuda, the Virgin Islands, Gibraltar, U.S., it doesn't matter. If you're rich, which is, it's just a classic example of, aiming to attack rich people and inevitably landing on working people.
You're rich.
It's a stupid idea.
By the way, everyone, here's a product placement. I drink my morning coffee every day in my beachy Vancouver-based cycling store coffee cup. You can find them on, I don't know what the street is in Vancouver. Yeah. But anyway, this is my coffee cup.
Thanks for sharing.
Back to more. You're welcome. What else we have here?
I'll just round this out before we introduce our guests. I just found, just to the BC budget, to come back to that, they blamed the weakness in housing, and they also blamed, of course, the U.S., which is the convenient scapegoat these days for all of the mismanagement that's been going on for a long time. But I found something quite interesting is just on the housing stuff. We've talked about the weakness there. There was actually a report that came out from CIBC. It's funny because the media is picking it all up, and it's like, well, we've been talking about this for 18 months now, but the because CIBC has written it, it's obviously front page news. CIBC is basically saying that the CMHC housing starts data is incorrect, which he's basically saying. Benjamin Tao is saying that housing starts in Canada's biggest markets are up to 50% below the levels provided by CMHC. So when you read the housing starts headlines, he's saying that those are really statistically incorrect and they're probably 50% lower than what's being published. And the reason, he says, is because of what we've talked about, which is housing starts nationally are usually lagging by 1 to 2 years because a housing start is when you've built it back to grade. And so, he's saying, based on information obtained by Urban Nation and Zonda, we suggest that in the GTA and the GVA, the real level of housing starts is roughly 50% and 30% below the headline numbers, respectively. And given the early signs of softness in other parts of the country, the gap between real and headline housing starts statistics is likely to grow. So again, that's why I've always said you got to watch the new construction, the pre-sale numbers, right? We've talked about in the GTA last year, you had a 30-year low in new home sales in the GTA. So if you can't pre-sell your product, you don't get financing to then dig the hole and become a housing start. So if you go to where the puck, skate to where the puck is going, it's clear that you're going to have little to no new housing starts in the very near future once that data starts to catch up.
Can I ask a dumb question? So that I understand that for condos, which you need pre-sales for big condo high rises or whatever, for dog crate condos. Is that true for like a subdivision, like single family homes or row houses and stuff?
Depending
And
on the
does
size,
that-
if you're building like a couple single family houses, if you're building a couple duplexes, you're typically not pre-selling those, right? You're just going to build them on, we call them on spec. You're going to build them, complete them, sell them as finished product. But if you're building like anything at scale,
What does on spec mean? Like on speculation?
yeah, you're building on speculation, correct?
Okay.
Yeah. But in general, like to hedge your risk, of course, and to actually build these projects out, you're typically going to pre-sell anything of size. And of course, condos account for the largest share of new housing construction or new housing starts in this country, right? We just don't build a lot of new single family houses because they're no longer really economical. I mean, we're just building more and more condos.
Because you will own nothing and love it.
Yeah. But to that point, what I found interesting, so we've talked about how weak the new condo space is, particularly in the GTA. That's really the epicenter, 30-year low in sales last year. There's actually funds now being created, private funds that are actually partnering with the Ontario government to purchase at bulk unsold pre-sale units.
Oh, good. Another cash handout to corporations who have extended themselves. Very good.
So, I just found it interesting. It's called like they use the Build Ontario Fund. So basically, they partner with the Ontario government. The Ontario government gives them money, and
And the feds too, no?
What's that?
And the federal government as well?
No, it's just strictly an Ontario
okay.
provincial program. So they're using I think it's called the Build Ontario Fund, and they're using these Ontario tax dollars to basically buy up unsold but completed inventory. So they're going into the developers and saying, hey, you built this condo development project, you've got 50 units left that are unsold. We'll come in and we'll buy 30 of them at bulk, at a discount. Mm-hmm. And then the Ontario government is obviously supplying some of that capital with the requirement that some of these units will be rented out at affordable rents, which is effectively 25% below market is the requirement. So anyways, that's
Is this a good idea? On. I know I'm being skeptical and kind of.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd call it like a quasi bailout, but it's interesting. Like it's just reaching a point where like it is a real.
Yeah,
problem.
I wouldn't call it quasi either. I'd call it direct.
A bailout.
Yeah,
it's a bailout.
I don't
See,
know.
back to the real estate data the finished housing data that Benjamin Tal reported.
Yeah.
That the actual numbers are actually worse than what's reported by the CMHC. Does that affect the industry in any way? I imagine if you are in the industry, you already know how healthy or unhealthy it is. So you know what the real numbers are. So does this do anything, or is it kind of affect the psychology of maybe, the average person? They might see it and go, oh, wow, I'm definitely not going to buy at this point.
I don't know. I don't know how many people like. I don't think the general public really monitors like housing starts data. I just always find it really interesting when like there'll be an uptick one month and then like a government official will come out and tweet like, "Oh, housing starts are up this month. We're still keeping decent pace." And it's like, well, guys, no, not really. Like anyone that's on the ground that has any pulse close to the market knows like the dire state of new construction in your call it your two largest provinces or like BC and Ontario. Those markets are like literally on life support. Like the ventilator is out and it's bad. So,
Can I read you my tweet? Oh, sorry.
you
Go
just
ahead.
look at these housing starts numbers and you're like, yeah. So it's interesting now, obviously, like now that CIBC comes out, Benjamin Tal, who everybody loves, everyone's like, whoa, yeah, well, geez, pay attention. It's like, guys, all you had to do is look at the pre-sale numbers, which have been published for the last 2 years of how bad things are going.
So I
Well, the
tweeted
NIMBYs
today.
in my neighborhood are flying. They're not slowing down here at all. So,
Steve, I put my foot in it today because I tweeted Canada's housing starts are trending higher. This is good.
Yeah, see, you're a classic. This is why we need to bring Trevor Tombe on the show. He knows what's going on. Yeah, well, let's bring in Trevor. Let's tee him up this week. I think our audience will really like his insights here. I think that he's always been very. I found him to be on Twitter to be always be quite balanced. I think he's always put out a lot of thoughtful research, a lot of great charts. He's advised governments at all different levels of all different party stripes. So a little bit on his background. Trevor is a professor at the University of Calgary's Department of Economics and the director of fiscal and economic policy at the School of Public Policy. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Toronto, and an undergraduate degree in finance from SFU. So his research explores a broad set of topics, including international trade, public finances, and fiscal federalism. He's been published in top economic journals, is the co-author of textbooks, Public Finance in Canada, and he is also the co-director of finances of the Nation, a Public Policy Forum fellow, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. In addition to his academic work, he actively advises various governments on a wide range of issues and contributes to policy development and discussions through regular op-eds, articles, media engagement, and is a regular contributor to The Hub. Sean Spear of The Hub, who we have had on as well. So without further ado, let's bring in Trevor right now. Trevor, welcome to the Loonie Hour.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. I mean, I guess kind of curious, like, we framed you up prior to the podcast, but what are you working on most at the moment? Like what kind of is really garnering most of your attention?
I think there's a couple issues that I've been actively working on for years, but increasingly so recently. And one that tops the list is, I think, connected to some of the trade disputes we're seeing with the United States, and that's interprovincial trade. So governments across the country have long recognized that it's not exactly frictionless for a business to sell their good or service to customers located elsewhere in the country, or if you're a firm seeking to expand and operate different facilities simultaneously across provincial boundaries, then there's some costs associated with that. Cost because rules and regulations and standards and certifications and everything differs from one location to another, just because provinces have different rules, different expectations, different processes, and so on. And so as international trade frictions going to increase, especially in some sectors, governments have naturally looked to trade diversification. What other markets can we open up? And it turns out we can open up our own market quite a bit relative to where it's been. And we've seen some moves there. So my work is really about quantifying how big those costs are, how much they also drag on Canada's overall economy. And it depends on the sector, but some recently released work just a couple of months ago suggests it might be as much as 7% of Canada's economy is held back, which might sound like a small number, but that's a little over $210 billion per year in foregone economic activity. That's lower incomes, lower wages, lower salaries, lower profits, and so on. as a result of these frictions that exist between provinces in Canada.
I think we could use that 200 billion that you just said. So
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
you
Okay.
can you describe sort of like an example of where a company, or you don't have to say the name of the company, was thinking about expanding from one province to the other, and they were just blindsided with how inefficient it is, or maybe how unattractive it is, or it's not as attractive as they thought, just so that the
Yeah.
audience would really understand what this means.
Yeah, I think the best example for me is the regulations that face the trucking industry. When you're driving a truck across provinces, say you're shipping a good from Vancouver to Toronto, you're going to face different rules around the tires that are allowed, the weight that you can load up your truck on, the signs that you must use on the truck in different jurisdictions. Maybe requiring you to pause at the border and wait a certain amount of time before proceeding into the next, because certain types of tires, for example, are allowable at certain times that are different from one province to the next. And so this is a cost that is not just going to be facing the truckers themselves, but also something that just cascades through the entire economy to anything that's shipped by truck in this case. And so the costs facing that sector have an outsized impact. And so that's kind of a simple example, but others may very well just be that the product that you're using needs to be designed in a certain way to comply with certain standards. Bottle size requirements in certain contexts are different. And so if you're, a beverage company thinking about either selling or operating across provinces, having to have two separate lines for different sizing requirements, that obviously adds costs. And so
It's very important to get the bottles unique for each
yeah.
province.
Yeah, and I'd say it's not because provinces are deliberately choosing different rules just in order to inhibit trade or just for the sake of being different. It's just that they just randomly arrived at different rules than another province. Or maybe the rules are not all that different, but you need to go through an inspection. And so food, common example of that, where it might be inspected at the producing province. It might be inspected again by the federal government when it is crossing provincial borders. It might be inspected yet again in the province where it is sold to consumers on the consumption side. And so there's just duplication in that case of effort. Not because one province wants salmonella and another does not. It's just that you're going through now this process multiple times.
Are we
Can I ask you a
making?
quick? Oh, go
Go
for it.
ahead. I was just gonna ask, are we making any progress at all based on what you've seen? Like I know, it was announced, I think, as the tariff stuff ramped up that we can unlock our own trade internally, but have you noticed any like meaningful improvement or change, or is it kind of status quo?
Yeah, in the past couple of years, we have seen some improvements. So when we signed the trade agreements with Europe and TPP, for example, a couple of years ago, we also enacted what was called the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. And you might wonder what, country that was with. It was with Canada, between provinces. And this is something that, had some modest wins. It really set up a process for provinces to identify rules in some other location that they took issue with. And then it sets up a process to try and work through either harmonizing or mutually recognizing those differences. And it has had some early wins, several dozen agreements concluded or in the works through that. One of the early examples I like to talk about just because of how trivial it sounds, but costly it is for the businesses involved. It's that requirements to have a first aid kit on your work site. Pretty reasonable rule to have, but every province had a different requirement of what had to be in that first aid kit. So there was no standard kit that if you were a firm operating in multiple jurisdictions, you could just source from one supplier. You had to get different first aid kits. And so this easily is millions of dollars when aggregated across the economy. And that was an early win from that free trade agreement. But these are tiny little incremental improvements. What we saw last year, just I guess 2 months ago, at the end of last year, was largely in response to public pressure to move in a bigger way because of the disruptions with the United States. Was all of the governments in Canada agreed to what's called a mutual recognition agreement, where effectively they say, with some exceptions. I should say with many exceptions, but the baseline is that if there's an item that's good enough to be sold in your province, it is automatically allowed in mine, even if it doesn't technically conform to whatever rules exist in this province. So food is not covered by this, alcohol is not covered by this.
not.
There's many other exceptions listed as well. But that's a pretty big move that kind of changes the default, if you will, between provinces. So now that's good in goods for sure. But my own estimates that I referenced earlier, that 7%, that $210 billion number, about 180 billion of that is in services, not goods. And so big move in goods, with the exceptions aside, but the really big source of potential gains is improving things in services. And that's really from credentials recognition. If you're a financial advisor in one location, you may have to hold multiple credentials in order to access a bigger market and clients in other parts of the country. And so it's beyond just your ability to move from one place to another and work seamlessly in the country. It also inhibits our ability to trade in services, which is most of what we trade interprovincially.
So that's what I wanted to just jump in. So we've shared that there was a paper from the IMF in 2019 that estimated non-tariff trade barriers, which is really what you're sort of alluding to, as something like 19%. There was another paper that came out just a couple of months ago that the number was much closer to like 7 or 8%. To put that into context, the US effectively had basically 0.1% tariffs on Canada. That's gone up to what the Bank of Canada assumes is like 5.8 or 6.8, whatever. Where do you think the number is, just before we move on, just like as far as percentage of quote unquote tariffs that we have interprovincially?
Yeah, so I should say I was an author on both of those IMF reports that you mentioned. They're the most recent one that was
I thought, sorry. I thought I'd let you say so.
Yeah. And it's been a really great team to work with there. And it really does shine a big light on this as an issue when the IMF is pointing out, hey, maybe you ought to move the needle here. And so what is the number? A very economist answer here. It depends. It depends on
Well done.
how you're measuring it. And there are different methods. And so why you might get a different number in one paper than another is because there are different methods. But, across all the different methods that you use, the kind of ballpark magnitude we should have in mind is that it's something on the order of an additional GST or three on the items. And that range is unavoidable. We're trying to infer something that you can't see directly. It's not as though provinces are levying tariffs on each other where you can just look up what the tariff is and away you go. These are trying to quantify unobservable frictions that result from hundreds of thousands of differences in rules and regulations across the country. And so it's a non-trivial exercise, but whatever method you have in mind, those costs are real and adds up to significant implications for the economy overall.
So Trevor, what was the reaction to that narrative and story when it comes out? Because the US Canada story, it's getting a little bit of attention every now and then.
A little bit.
For Canadians, just a little bit. But I don't think this one is getting nearly as much attention. And maybe that's an easier one to fix or correct. Like, are governments, both at provincial and federal level, are they interested in this story? In mainstream media, it's like, what happened after you wrote this paper? By the way, Rich knows Carolyn Rogers, so he can do an introduction for you at the Bank of Canada if you need it.
I met her in the airport. She was lovely.
Great. So I think back to early last year when the potential for U.S. tariffs of 25% across the board, 10% even on energy exports being floated by the president. And we saw then different premiers effectively competing against each other about who would be Captain Canada in their response. And Tim Houston stood out as one who was really pushing for big changes on interprovincial trade. quite significantly, leading with then these kind of bilateral agreements between different provinces to fully mutually recognize everything, including services and credentials. And that, I think, absolutely moved the needle. And we saw dozens of MOUs between different provinces following that. Ontario took up the mantle there in a really big way. Some of these are now in force. So Alberta and Nova Scotia have a really significant one, even for the credential recognitions, where to get one now, if you're in good standing in Alberta and you have appropriate insurance, then that's it. That's all you need in order to get automatically the credential of the other jurisdiction. And you still have to, submit an application, but then the body on the other end has 10 days to make a decision, which is a dramatic improvement relative to previous timelines. And so even there, some real improvements. And then all that built to the national mutual recognition agreement between all the governments that while I noted it just accesses a fraction of the available gains and does have a lot of exceptions. It represents a fundamental change to how I think many provinces are viewing this issue. Before, it was viewed as this technocratic exercise of, oh, let's figure out the right first aid kit and all come to an agreement on that. We don't have centuries to go through the million plus tiny little changes you'd have to enact. And so the default here of trusting each other. If there's a regulation in your jurisdiction, then it's good enough in mine for the item in question. And that trust hasn't existed before. I mean, it's kind of a feature of a decentralized federation where each province is going to be guarding its own area of jurisdiction, its own autonomy and independence, its own sovereignty, if you will. And that mutual recognition agreement, that's a big change. And so I guess I give governments a lot of credit to, even though there's a lot left to do, they've moved in a big way last year.
So, Trevor, I want to kind of switch gears. Speaking of sort of like unity and one Canada, there's been a lot of discussion in the media about, energy projects. I've seen you in a recent press conference, sitting side by side there with Premier Daniel Smith. I'm assuming you're chatting with the Carney government as well. What's kind of your involvement in that space?
So you're referring to the Alberta Next panel, which was an initiative launched by the provincial government here to travel around to different parts of the province, exploring different policy ideas to, I guess, strengthen Alberta's position within the federation in terms of different initiatives, from thinking about an Alberta pension plan or a revenue collection agency or provincial police force and many other issues as well. And, all of these issues, none of them are new. But it was really about trying to hear from as broad a swath of Albertans as possible in terms of how they view these policy ideas, because they all have pros and cons, and they're, triggers strong opinions by many, I think is fair to say. My involvement there was really just one of many individuals on that panel. 16 of us, and that kind of filtered into a report that recommended different ways of moving forward on some of these issues, and perhaps suggesting not moving forward in the short term on others. And we'll see where that goes. That's ultimately up to the government. But in general, as an academic, and there's many academics across the country that are very happy to engage with governments of any political party. If the goal is trying to improve outcomes, in my case as an economist, thinking about improving economic outcomes and improving policy, I never turn down an opportunity to chip in where I can.
What's your take on sort of projects of importance, or like, are you shaping any of that conversation? Obviously, like, I'm here in BC. We had BC's massive budget deficit, that was announced a couple of days ago. Same government that's, says he doesn't want a pipeline from, to Tidewater. There's been a lot of debate and discussion around that. I'm kind of curious your thoughts. And I know, because you wrote a piece, I think, recently in the Hub as well, just talking about why Canada should think twice before building more refineries. I don't know, perhaps you can kind of chime in on that conversation.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of shaping conversations, I wouldn't claim I have any ability to shape any kind of large national conversations. I mean, that's ultimately up to, in this case, elected leaders to do. I'm happy to chip in a small amount of insight where I can in terms of writing that I do for the hub. But yeah, lots of issues that I think time will tell whether we're going to see big dividends from them. We're certainly seeing a lot of signals that the federal government is certainly interested in a little bit more flexibility now than it has been in recent years. Flexibility in terms of changing what type of policies exist in general. We're seeing it repeal many, or in which policies apply in which parts of the country. And so a little bit more flexibility within Canada as well. And I think that's the right direction they need to go in. We're seeing now provinces with very different experiences through this moment of disruption and uncertainty. The international trade shock is much, much bigger for Ontario and Quebec than it is elsewhere. Issues around energy export infrastructure is also uniquely important in producing provinces like Alberta. And I should say BC is a large energy producer as well. But
Don't tell David Eby that, though.
yeah. And so I certainly do not know the right way politically to move forward on some of these issues because, yeah, they're large, complicated issues that touch on many different issues, and there does need to be some balance here. But what we've seen, especially with Premier Smith here in Alberta and Prime Minister Carney, coming to an agreement on what I viewed as a pretty significant compromise and a productive compromise where Alberta did move in a big way on some of its carbon pricing policies for large emitters here in the province in exchange and connected to the federal government moving in terms of its support for a pipeline. So we'll see if it actually gets some big projects done, but I think the rhetoric is in the right direction, and that's not nothing.
Well, just switching gears a little bit. One of the things I talk about a lot is productivity growth. The government has outlined, the Bank of Canada has outlined a couple of reasons why productivity growth has been weak in Canada. One is a labor mix, two is lack of competition in key sectors, and the one that I go on and on about is capital expenditure or investment per capita. I mean, can you just from sort of an academic perspective sort of relitigate that for us? Like, tell us what's been happening and what needs to happen. Like, forget the politics. Just like, if you were the king of Canada and you were trying to improve Canada's productivity growth, what would you do? And why is CapEx so important, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So first, what's been happening over the past many years, roughly decade now, is that the pace of productivity growth has slowed dramatically. And so for context here, there's different measures of productivity. I think the simplest, most relevant measure, certainly relevant for individuals, is what's called labor productivity. This is how much we produce per hour worked. Yeah. So when we talk about productivity growth, it's not about working harder for less pay, which is intuition that many have in mind. But it's about getting more for each hour that we put in, typically because of better access to machinery, equipment, technology, and so on. So the largest source of labor productivity growth by far is investment. It's what's called capital deepening, which really just means we have more machinery, equipment, and technology and all sorts of things like that allow us to produce more for each hour that we worked. And that translates directly into higher incomes per hour. So over long spans of time, that's basically the whole ballgame. Labor productivity growth is about improvements in living standards, improvements in average hourly labor compensation. So over the past 10 years, this measure of productivity has grown by about 0.2% per year.
Is that good?
That is not good. Okay. If you look at the
Loonie Hour math, if we round it, it goes to zero, basically.
That's right.
If you round down.
If you look at the 20 previous years, so the 2 decades prior to this most recent one, the average annual growth rate was 1.5%. So
that's better.
Way bigger. That's better. So basically what that means is we've roughly grown over the past 10 years what we typically did each year for 20 previous years.
Crazy.
And this is not some global experience either. The slowdown in productivity is something that we see in Canada much, much more than other economies. So relative to the OECD, that's grown about 15% or so over this span of time, we've grown in total by about 2. And so what that means is we're generating fewer goods and services per year, which means we're generating less income per year and a lot less income per year. Had we kind of just kept pace with our previous normal growth, the economy today would be something on the order of $600 billion larger. That's a lot, in per person terms, divide 600 billion by 40 million. That's a pretty considerable
Way
hit
too much math for the Loonie Hour, I'm afraid.
big
And
numbers.
our 200 billion from the provincial.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, the provincial stuff, that's about gains we could get in addition. The foregone productivity hit that we've experienced is us incurring a cost already that is even larger. It's just been relatively slow moving and has accumulated over 10 years. And so it hasn't been noticed as much until the disruptions with the United States really focused people's attention on the economy and the strength of the economy, and reminding us that, well, wait a second, we might be experiencing a weaker economy because of domestic factors that we should perhaps try and change and adjust. So investment, yeah, that's the biggest driver here of labor productivity growth. And so therefore policies that affect investment or investment incentives are incredibly important to think about. And there are lots. I would, at the top of the list in terms of things the government might want to think about short term, well, one is infrastructure. And it is indeed thinking about that, trying to move the needle there. And that's a difficult one. Second, though, is tax reform. That one.
Raising taxes, you mean?
No, but I don't just mean necessarily cutting tax rates. I mean smart tax reform that really zeroes in on investment incentives. So what right now is the effective tax that we have in place for investment, like a dollar invested in different sectors? It varies. So if you're in construction, say, this is a sector that has experienced actually negative productivity growth over the past decade.
Steve.
So, yeah, worse
Housing.
than the aggregate. And that's a sector too that faces a roughly 20% effective tax rate on a dollar that's invested into that sector. And so there's things we can do to bring that down to zero. And I don't just mean like abolishing the corporate income tax system. That'd be one approach. Another smarter way would be allow for full expensing, full and immediate expensing as a permanent feature of the tax system available to all sectors. We saw the government in its last budget last year implement this that was really largely targeted on manufacturing, dropping their marginal effective tax rate on investment to close to zero, which is great, but that's targeted and temporary. It's going to phase out in a few years' time. And so it doesn't really have the same longer term impact that we need to sustain
Trevor,
increases in investment.
Let's continue. I think we know that maybe the last 10 years in Canada, it's leaving us today a lot of opportunities to really improve our economy and the country and all that stuff together. Let's just jump over to the energy sector right now. And let's talk a bit more about like, what do you see? Like, where's the most optimism? What kind of opportunities are available? Just to get everyone excited again about an industry that basically we've been told we should never be excited about again. And because we think this window has now open, the pendulum is swinging, but let's talk about the optimism now that we have in the energy sector for Canadians.
Sure. So Canada has long been a country that has a real advantage in resources, energy in particular, but also mining, also agriculture too, as a big source of export. We have an advantage there because of the natural endowments that we have in our country. Oil and gas is a big one. That's about 2/3 or so of the overall amount of activity in mining and oil and gas. And we generate considerable income from those projects. Like, it's really hard to understate how big positive impact, the resource sector has overall. So we've talked about GDP, and what that basically means is the amount of income that's being generated, the income for wages and salaries, income for corporate profits, and so on. And mining oil and gas, it's close to $200 billion or so in direct value added that it's creating. A lot of that going towards workers in the sector. In addition, it buys a lot from elsewhere. It buys a lot throughout the Canadian economy from suppliers, spending well in excess of most recent data, something on the order of $110 billion in intermediate inputs that it purchases from elsewhere. So you have Ontario-based banks selling huge amounts to Alberta-based oil and gas firms as an input into their operations and production. So it just has an outsized impact on the economy overall. And so there's opportunities there. We've seen the Trans Mountain Pipeline come online that really illustrated the value of efficient energy export infrastructure. This was a pipeline that certainly cost a lot more than was originally projected, rising from an initial $5 billion estimated cost in 2013 to 34, give or take, billion right now. But even with that higher price tag, it was worth every penny. And it's really not even close. And it does this in a couple of ways. It's cheaper to export by pipe than by rail, for example, and that matters for shippers. But the big economic effect is that infrastructure like this closes the gap between what world prices are and what prices we receive here in Canada. Because think about it as us selling on to the world, but really what's left over from that sale is you then deduct kind of a differential that's largely due to transportation costs for kind of the last few barrels that we're exporting. And so a pipeline shrinks that differential. And we've seen that in a big way since Trans Mountain came on the scene. And it's hard to estimate directly, but pipelines, the Canada Energy Regulator estimated, I guess most recently, that if we have ample pipeline capacity so that that's never the bottleneck, then that can add something on the order of $9 a barrel or something to what we receive, which doesn't sound big. But when you multiply that across all of the barrels that we produce, it's enormous.
Yeah, Trevor, I've made that point before, which is the difference between our regular listeners will know the West Texas Intermediate and Western Canadian Select. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for reiterating the point. I mean, do you think that's true also for the mining sector? Like we've heard things like it takes 10 years to approve a mine. We have extremely low energy costs, which is what you need to refine a lot of these products and to give them significant value add. You made the point about how we shouldn't build refineries. I kind of disagree, but just in general, I mean, Keith talked about opportunity, but is there just still so much low-hanging fruit that frankly our government just continues to put the brakes on? I mean, or is that too simplistic?
Well, just to give a sense of scale, I guess, on pipelines, and I'll broaden out to these other areas, that differential, if you think about the next 25 years, and a differential of that $9 reduction, what would that add up to in today's dollars as a result? I estimate, a lot, about $240 billion, just again, based on the Canada Energy Regulator estimates here, and far in excess of the cost of the projects themselves, although I don't want to excuse the cost overruns on this particular project. The value is so large on these projects. And that's large independent of whether we increase production in the future. Now that's true in mining as well. The cost of exporting resources, the cost of exporting anything is a drag on the affected sector. And our physical ability to export is constrained by the amount of rail capacity we have, the efficiency of operations within rail, the size of our ports and the capacity to export there. So things like expanding Vancouver and expanding Montreal, these are very important projects that benefit everyone who ships a good out from Canada. But yes, mining, very important because in a lot of cases, I guess it depends on what you're mining, but it can be large, heavy, bulky material. And so then the physical capacity to export matters a lot. And so that's important. But then on expanding production, actually bringing new facilities on, yeah, the regulatory process, not just in mining, but especially so, is way too long. Uh, Vancouver Port, for example, that expansion was kind of initiated, at least the regulatory process was initiated, I believe, in late 2014, and it wasn't it wasn't kind of really approved until roughly 10 years later, which is amazing. I mean, a no-brainer project takes 10 years to do. A project that now the government is crystal clear on is of national significance. It is now on the list, but it needed to be on the list, although of course the list didn't exist, but it needed something to recognize its incredibly large value 10 years ago, and yet it took that long, which is just insane. And so improving that across the board is necessary. Now, I'm not an expert in the mining sector specific environmental regulations or other issues that it needs to confront, but they need to be speeded up. The certainty needs to be there. And this doesn't mean we need weaker regulations. They just need to be clear, predictable, certain. And if it's going to result in a no, have a quick no. And if it's going to result in a yes, then make that decision. We just need to be more efficient and lowering that uncertainty. That's also good for investment.
Are there other countries that have adopted a newer approach that Canada can use as maybe a role model to see that, yeah, actually there is a more successful, more efficient way? Or is Canada actually, blazing the trail with this new approach?
That's a good question. I guess I won't have a direct answer to it because it'll depend on each type of regulation we're talking about, and that might vary from one sector to another. In Canada's case, being very decentralized, one province to another as well. Like it's not just the federal government's fault here. Provinces are also responsible for a great deal of regulation. So what's clear is that most other advanced industrial economies have not experienced the same kind of productivity slowdown that Canada has over the past decade. That's something that
so
we're experiencing.
They don't feel the need to get better. They're already where we could be, I guess.
Yeah, Trevor, it's to your point earlier. There was an article out this week in the Globe and Mail from Enbridge where they said they're not willing to take on the development risk of an Alberta pipeline project, with the CEO saying, quote, "I don't think investors or the infrastructure companies should be taking on the risk of development in jurisdictions that have historically created a challenge."
And that's understandable. It's very costly to undertake these projects, and if the end result of it is incredibly uncertain, then you naturally may not undertake that at the start. So it's incredibly prudent, and that's really just something that shouldn't be surprising. Uncertainty lowers investment. That's sort of an obvious point, but there's a lot of research on this as well, quantifying it, and the magnitudes are really big, like measurably. So in this case, with major projects and private proponents perhaps not moving forward, the government kind of has two choices here. Reform the regulatory process to make it more certain, or backstop projects in the early phases, and which I think is not an ideal solution, but we bought the Trans Mountain Pipeline for, when push comes to shove, that project was worth it, no question. And the private proponent pulled out, and what was left was for the government to undertake that project. The risks for any other private proponent coming on board, prohibitive, and so there was really no choice. And that's kind of where we're at. If we're going to have a regulatory system that does not facilitate private involvement on projects that make eminent sense, then that'll lead the government to undertake them instead, perhaps less efficiently. So that's the trade-off. And so I think in the short term, having government backstop it, yeah, may make sense. But in the longer term, we just need to fix the fundamentals to make private investment more attractive.
Trevor, can I just ask one more question? I know we're running up against the clock here, but We mentioned in your bio that you talk a lot about fiscal issues, and you talk about fiscal issues at the federal level, if I understand. One of the themes that we've sort of been developing on, and we think is going to become a really big deal this year and certainly maybe next, is the rising cost of interest payments that both the federal government and the provincial governments are going to have to face with the steepening of the yield curve, deficits that are blowing up, refinancing of debt that's maturing. 30% of Canada's federal debt is going to mature this year and next. Is that something that, I mean, I don't think people are talking about it enough. Keith has gone on and on to get me to triangulate it. I was wondering if you could just give us some insight on what I think is like an iceberg that is slowly appearing on the horizon.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work on longer term fiscal projections for all of the provinces and the federal government, and this is put out pretty regularly. The Parliamentary Budget Office does this too in its fiscal sustainability reports. And it all boils down, less to interest costs than the overall amount of debt. And if debt is growing faster than the economy, something will have to give eventually. That
Good or bad?
yeah. Well, I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, but mechanically, you cannot increase public debt faster than the economy year after year after year after year. It has to stop at some point, requiring either a tax increase or a spending reduction. And that's not a value judgment about good or bad. That's arithmetic that can't, literally can't grow faster than the economy for the indefinite future. And right now, you have all governments facing a situation where debt is more likely than not going to continue growing faster than the economy. BC, it's had a big reversal. BC is now the least sustainable of every provincial government, like least period, less sustainable than Newfoundland and Labrador, which is not to pick on Newfoundland and Labrador, but that's a province with uniquely large, longer term challenges. Whereas BC is in a situation that's somewhat worse, largely as a result of policy choices rather than
See,
fundamental.
Steve, BC is good at something. You're knocking it out.
Yeah. But now the federal government too. Previously it has enjoyed some longer term fiscal space, largely because it's not exposed to aging in the same way that provinces are through healthcare. But with the increase in military spending to 3.5% of GDP, now the federal government is looking at a situation where for many years, decades to come, its debt to GDP is rising. So like in the federal budget, they have their own long-term projection that they put out to 2055, and it's basically flat debt to GDP for a while. But then you read kind of the assumptions that go into that, and they don't include the military spending increase in that.
Trevor, we've split things into capital expenditures and operating budgets, and we'll solve all of our problems.
Yeah, but it's
Or
hard to
you can just
overstate.
remove our glasses when we look at the numbers, then
There you
that
go.
works as well, maybe.
So the scale is large. Like if we were to cover the military spending increase without cutting spending elsewhere and not increasing the debt trajectory, we'd have to double the GST from 5 to 10% just for that alone. So the federal fiscal pressures are also very large. So I do worry about this because no government has really even attempted to try and tackle this issue. No government is really looking about or looking at their long-term fiscal future. They're really just making very short-term choices, maybe looking this year and next, but the longer-term perspective is completely absent.
So, Trevor, one of the most sort of, I guess, appetizing ways to do this, it seems like you have to, if you can get the economy to grow faster,
Yeah,
that will certainly help. I guess with
yeah.
that being said, would there be like, could you name, or if you're, let's say, you're Mark Carney for a day, is there 2 or 3 projects that you'd be like, yeah, these are the ones we're gonna rubber stamp? Obviously, there's politics and negotiations and all that stuff, but if you sort of had carte blanche, you're like,
No.
these 2 projects.
No. There are no set of projects that if you undertake them, then all the problems are solved. And so let me, I guess, paint a picture here about the magnitudes that we're talking about. First, the strengthening the economy. Yeah, of course, that would ease these pressures. The economy really is, the amount of income that is being generated from the goods and services we produce. The productivity slowdown is massive. The gap between where we are and where the US is wider now than at any point since the Second World War. We've never seen it this large. And if we were to just get back to 2014, we would have to sustain a boost in our productivity of about 0.7% a year for the next quarter century. And I say zero point 0.7 not because I'm picking a number out of thin air. That's kind of the number that the government's own optimistic projections are about if all of their hopes and dreams that they laid out in the budget come to pass, it would effectively be boosting growth by 0.7% a year relative to what it otherwise would have been. And so if we assume that's over and above what the US can do, which is itself a generous assumption, then we've got to tackle this year after year after year after year for 25 straight years just to get back to where we were in 2014. For our fiscal challenges, what the federal government needs to ensure its debt to GDP doesn't rise, but can accommodate the increased military spending, and it doesn't have to change taxes or spending elsewhere, it would need about a 1% increase in productivity. Forever. And I should say, we've never seen a period where we have grown 1% faster than the US in per person terms for more than just a small number of years. So of course, it's happened before, but not something that's just sustained over the long term. So boosting the economy, absolutely. For its own sake, it improves living standards. It eases the affordability challenge, which I think is really but what's behind that is slow productivity. So absolutely, but it's not going to be something that'll solve the fiscal challenges federally. Those are just too large. And then provincially, the health pressures from an aging population, it's roughly double the size of what the federal government faces from the military spending increase. And so even less likely to be solved with hoped for increased productivity growth. So in order to sustain productivity growth over many years, it's not about one project or another, however valuable those projects are. It's about changing the fundamentals to improve investment incentives for businesses in a way that's permanent.
So that's the thing that's driving me.
Saying there's a chance. That's what I'm hearing here.
But that's what's so crazy. Like, Trevor, I mean, like, it's funny because the problems we have are quite enormous, frankly, and wide-ranging. But like the answer to it is obviously so tantalizingly obvious. And unlike you, I have zero expectations of this current government to do a complete about face on their philosophy about diagnosing the issue that you have outlined and I've outlined and other people, and B, opening Canada up to what it desperately needs, which is foreign investment, and also for domestic investors to start reinvesting domestically in order to improve our productivity.
Exactly.
So it's sorry, I'm sharing my frustration, but it just seems it just seems like we could just almost grab it if we just weren't so stupid, basically.
Well, let's hope your expectations are too low and that we can cross
Spoken
that
like
bar.
a true academic, I'd say.
Increasing resource activity. It's about building infrastructure for oil and gas. It's about pipelines. For other resource activities, it's about other types of infrastructure, rail and ports and so on. We're moving on ports. So hopefully we can see even more there. We'll see what happens with pipelines here, facilitating increased oil and gas activity. I think these are incredibly valuable projects, that I think it's fair to say are difficult because they touch on a lot of issues, sometimes unrelated to the project itself. So,
You're being
climate
too
concerns.
polite, though. You're being too polite. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm going to say it for you. It's because our government's not interested. Our government does not seem interested. I mean, MOUs notwithstanding, and Glencore just pulled back on $1 billion in Quebec. I mean, we still have no pipeline. I mean, the natural resource sector has basically it is a 20-year low in real terms with respect to CapEx spend. Manufacturing regulations have soared. It just goes on and on and on. And unless you have a change in philosophy about what we do as a nation and who we are, I just don't think it's going to go on. Sorry, I'm waxing on, but.
Yeah. And I certainly have no inside knowledge of what's motivating the federal government, but I think it's fairly clear that at least in terms of some of the rhetoric and early policy moves of Carney's government, it is a change relative to what the country has
Fair.
seen for many years. How far that goes, whether it's far enough, I mean, that's a separate conversation, but I think the effort is there. And whether the effort achieves the success that they hope for, we'll see. Um, but yeah, it's a difficult needle to thread in some cases, and I think the MOU, I also wouldn't understate the value of that. This is demonstrating that you had two governments, Daniel Smith and Mark Carney, agreeing on some big issues with some real compromises by both sides to move the needle forward on smarter policy in general. Like there was a lot in there beyond the pipeline, but also moving forward on export infrastructure and facilitating an expansion of oil and gas activity, which is a massive potential boost economically, not just for Alberta. I should say quite clearly that nearly every province benefits from strong commodity prices and strong resource sectors, uh, especially through the supply chain purchases that these firms are engaging in. So I hope for success there for sure. But long term, even if we succeed on these difficult projects, that's not going to permanently change the rate of growth of the country for the next generation. We need to change the fundamentals that are affecting investment incentives. And that is, I think, why I raise issues like tax reform, permanent changes in the tax system to materially improve incentives. And it's difficult, and I don't know how governments cut through these difficult issues, but historically, governments have opted to do things like royal commissions, where it led to free trade with the United States, the McDonald Commission in the 1980s, for example. So sometimes royal commissions have the space to think about big changes to the structure of policy in the economy that it's a process that also might increase buy-in. And so it might be time, we haven't done it since the 1980s, it might be time to do a big rethink about where we are and what can change. That's one option. But however we get there, I think if we want to ensure Canadian prosperity returns to where it was, if we want to boost growth and sustain that boosted growth for many years, there's no avoiding the need to take big or to make big changes, both federally and provincially.
Well, Trevor, I think it's a great place to wrap it up. We'll have to have you on in 10 years when these projects get approved, and we'll get you back. No, but in all seriousness, it was a wealth of information. I'm sure our audience picked up a ton there. And yeah, like I said, we've been following your work for a long time. So if anyone's interested in sort of following a lot of your stuff, what's the best place to do that?
I mainly write for the hubs. That's thehub.ca, and I guess that's the main one. I'm
You're
not
fairly
as
active on Twitter,
social
too.
media as I used to be, but
Yeah, are you less active on Twitter these days?
yeah, I think the past couple of years on social media has been a little fragmented. Lots of different platforms coming out, so it's hard to stay on the ball with so many. So I just sort of gave up.
All right, okay, we'll plug the hub. Sean Spear, friend of the show. Thank you so much, Trevor, for coming on, and we'll hopefully have you on again here soon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Hopefully everyone enjoyed our interview there with Trevor. Obviously, again, I highly encourage people to check out his work, his writing at the hub. But yeah, Keith, I mean, what else is going on in the world? We sort of talked about it just pre our interview there with Trevor, but U.S. Iran, there seems to be a lot of rumors circulating around the internet. I think there's these what are those accounts now that track where U.S. Navy vessels and fighter jets are going. It's kind of, and then you got the pizza counter. maybe give us a little heads up in terms of what you're following, what you're tracking.
Yeah, without getting too dramatic. I mean, the conversation we just had then was more about longer term policy. How can the country move and stuff? But we really want to, emphasize with the audience, we're doing this Thursday, and by next Thursday, we could have a very different conversation taking place. And one of them is the immediate, the U.S.-Iran, what do you want to call it, Rich? Situation, whatever it's going
Sure.
to be. But the problem, it's just something that we've been tracking for a while. And like at Ice Capital, we have, a very in-depth strategy meetings about how to sort of game plan this from a portfolio perspective. And we do it every week. We have our strategy in place, and then we revisit, okay, is this trend strengthening or getting weaker? And it's strengthening still. So, we won't go into details, but the strengthening part of it is that the Americans are building up a significant amount, I would call it equipment for the area. And we will have an outcome from this, I would imagine, within the next couple of weeks.
Wait,
and
Keith,
the outcome,
where are they building up equipment?
Yeah, so the equipment's being built up. It's coming in through the Mediterranean, of course. I guess down in the upper Indian Ocean, more to the west, in that space. All the Americans' bases have been prepped. There's a lot of planes that
I was trying to translate. I was trying to get you to say
over.
the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman and the Straits of Hormuz, which is where Iran is and where lots of global oil passes through.
There is a lot, and but for time, we'll go into more detail with that probably next week if it's happening. But just to stress to everyone that we could have very significant market events happening any day, and the event could see, oil is up, $30, $50, equities are down 10, 20%, and stuff like that. So, have a look at your portfolio for risk. You're either going to be comfortable with the result or very uncomfortable with it. And, if you're insensitive about it, I know we're going to be comfortable with if there is an event from a financial perspective. But Steve, something else that came out today, it's not related to the US and Iran. Actually, a couple of days ago, we had the Fed minutes come out. So if you're into the Fed world or central bank world, the minutes sometimes give you more details of what was happening at the meeting than what they let on. But one of the things that was in the minutes that didn't come out in the Q&A and presser was that, this for the U.S. So the U.S. Federal Reserve, they specifically expressed concerns about vulnerability in the private credit space. And this is something that we've been talking about for quite some time now. Even the Loonie Hour Investor Series that we had with Ben Rabideau back in Toronto in early December, I think it was. We spent a lot of time on that. And, our view back then was always to look for more evidence that is either strengthening or maybe it's not an issue anymore. And now last week we did talk in more detail about how, the decline in equity prices for the software AI related names from some of the big ones. And we shared with everyone, a lot of these private credit, private equity firms, they could have anywhere from 20 to 30% or more exposure to that space. And you're trying to see, maybe we'll start to see some more gating or markdowns and stuff like that. Well, this morning we had one of Steve's favorite private credit funds, Blue Owl, came out. Do you want to share one of the headlines, Steve, or do you want me to come with the headline? There's a lot of them.
Well, you can go with the headline.
My favorite one is Blue Owl permanently halts redemptions at a private credit fund aimed at retail investors. It's a lot in there, but normally when a fund gates, it's always temporary, so you're going to try to work through it. But the Blue Owl is private credit, of course. I mean, they're lending, but a lot of these companies that are borrowing in the private credit space, they also have private equity tagged on with them as well. So it's not two separate markets. It's all entwined. But today, again, we had the Fed saying, hey, we're nervous about this. Loonie Hour was already saying, we're a bit concerned about this. And now today, we have the Blue Owl. Even the gentleman he used to be head of PIMCO. I'm not sure if he's still there. Mohammed Al Arian, I think, is that his name, Rich?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. He goes by Mo. I actually had drinks with him in Bermuda years back.
Really? That's kind of cool.
That was before Bill Gross was head of PIMCO at that time. But he was trying to sell some of the funds to us over there.
But Keith,
yes.
Sorry. No, just a quick one. It wasn't just Blue Owl. So Blue Owl fell on obvious news. Excuse me. revealed that permanently restrict investor withdrawals. But Apollo, I don't know if we're going to get in trouble for saying all the names, Blackstone, TPG, KKR, and another one I can't remember, all fell 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%. So that whole space, it's not just Blue Owl. It's that
But you
whole
mean the
space.
equity of the companies that are
Yes,
involved
yes,
in
yes.
that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, for everyone, the trend is continuing, that there continues to be concern and risk in the private credit space, which is showing up in private equity as well. So, continue to watch this story. Is something that we're very keen on. And again, like liquidity is pretty important there.
Hey, Keith.
So that's, I think that's okay, right, Steve, what you're looking for?
It's starting.
It's starting.
What's
starting?
I'm going to call my mom.
So yeah, just to sort of wrap that up, Blue Owl Capital's 307 billion in assets under management. So they permanently halted investor redemptions at its retail private credit fund. What else? So through the first 9 months of 2025, OBDC investors withdrew 150 million, up 20% year over year. While Blue Owl execs publicly assured investors there was, quote, no meaningful pressure on their asset base. Now they're facing a federal class action lawsuit for saying otherwise. And they've, of course, now permanently halted. So interesting. I'm just reading along here. They say they fire sold 1.4 billion in loans across 3 funds. Investors will get roughly 30% of their NAV back through quarterly distributions on Blue Owl's schedule, not theirs.
So the challenge here, of course, and the key word you say is with retail investors.
Yeah.
So for non-retail investors, accredited, bigger family offices and funds, they don't really need the liquidity. And if they get a markdown on it, they may not like it, but they sort of stick with their plan and everything. The challenge with retail investors is that, most are going to buy high and sell low. Every single market, you name it. I spoke with people over the last month, and they said, "Oh wow, I'm going to go buy all the AI stocks." They did great last year, and of course they bought the top, they're about to, and everything. But I think the challenge with the Blue Owl retail investor scenario is that, and that's where it turns into a liquidity event, is that as soon as people start selling, regardless of what the story is or the fundamentals, fixed income funds, bond funds, they just don't have the liquidity in them to meet when you get significant redemptions coming out. So I think that's one of the key stories with it here. And hey, it's something as Mo from PIMCO would call it, the canary in the coal mine, or I think he's also calling it, maybe it's the elephant in the room. Not the panda in the room. Remember you had panda in the room a while back?
No.
This is not a Chinese credit problem. This is right in America, basically.
If you're bored this weekend, 2 things to watch. Obviously, the Olympic hockey. Hopefully, Canada's in the gold medal game Sunday. But keep an eye on the account that tracks the Pentagon pizza orders.
That's great. Give everybody that website. What is it called?
I don't know. What is it? Do you have the handle, Rich?
Pentagon Pizza. I think the Pentagon Pizza Index. That's it. It's called. It's an amazing website. It's PIZZINT.watch. Just Google that for.
That's actually insane. So apparently, what they do is obviously, if they are in the war room running late at night because something's going on in the world geopolitically, all of a sudden all the rush of pizza orders comes flooding in. I guess that website tracks.
It's better than that. So they have on the website, this is too much. They have a bunch. They have the name of the pizza joint and how far it is from the Pentagon, and then it shows how much pizza is being ordered. And then somebody basically is argued that when the Pentagon starts ordering lots and lots of pizza, it means that people are staying in like their war room or whatever. And so you can see it's amazing. And the best part about the whole website is your cursor is a little piece of pizza.
I wonder how they're tracking that. That's actually unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Way
Great
too
website.
much spare time.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good place to leave it. As always, guys, we appreciate your support, and we'll see you next week.